Because our systems are terrible. Our systems are pathetic.
Welcome back to Agri Talk. Today we are talking about the use of pesticides. And with me in studio today is Claire Nasike from Greenpeace Africa. She is a food campaigner. And before we went on a break, we were discussing issues on what needs to be done to ensure that the food that we produce within the country is safe. So I'll ask you another question, Claire, on the same. Kenya is not food secure. We all know that. So we import a lot of food from our neighbors. So how do we also, how sure are we that our neighbors are also producing the same food in a safe way?
To answer that question, Philip, I think the same way that horticultural produce from Kenya to some of the European countries is rejected based on exceeding the maximum residue limits that are allowed by those European countries, is the same way we can put in place the standards and the procedures to make sure that any food that comes into Kenya doesn't exceed this set of residue limits. Once we have put that in place, then we're able to say that the food that we've imported as a country is not putting at risk the consumers who consume this food. So, for example, in the European Union, they have their own rules that show they do the testing and the analysis. And when they say that this produce from Kenya is above their residue limits, they send it back to us. That produce ends up in our market. That's the same thing we ought to implement at our borders, at every place. We ought to implement that and say, so this food is coming from this place. We have to check. Once it's clean, it comes in. If it doesn't lie within the residue limits that we as a country allow, then we can't get it in our country. We have to let it go. But most of the cases, because of one, corruption, we rarely do that. So we find that sugar with mercury ends up in our country. We find that cooking oil that is bad ends up in our country. So we don't have the systems in place. And that is one thing that the government should aim at putting in place.
Okay. From where you sit as a food campaigner, which food crops are most affected when it comes to the use of pesticides?
I think to the use of pesticides, a lot of farmers use pesticides on maize. They use pesticides on vegetables, tomatoes, most tomatoes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do? We discover that a farmer has used too much chemicals or too much pesticides, and they were not aware of that the pesticides they used were burnt or they were too much. What do we need to do? How do we need, because we also need to help these farmers. Where do we need to start from?
I think we need to start looking at the alternatives. What are the alternatives to pest control? Mm-hmm. And here, some people will say, oh, Kenya is a country in the tropics, there's a lot of pests, but we also have other alternatives that are effective in controlling pesticides. For the last few years, Greenpeace Africa has been working with farmers in Machakos, Makueni, and Kitui counties. And we have been training farmers on ecological farming. And this training it included training farmers on how to deal with pests and diseases on their farms using natural ways. So farmers we trained were able to control the fall armyworm using something so simple as ash and soil. And the fall armyworm gives a headache to most farmers, but the farmers we trained were able to use that. And someone can say that is not applicable on large scale, but there are other various ways in which you can control the fall armyworm. It's just not limited to soil alone. There are farmers who've been using neem oil to actually control that. And you know, neem grows as a plant, as a tree in Kenya. So you have access to neem. There are farmers who are using, like the ones who grow vegetables, they're using various methods like intercropping. You grow several crops together so that you deter the pests. There are various ways in which we can control pests, and it's just not limited to the use of pesticides alone.
Okay. You mentioned some very good solutions there. But my question would be, where is the communication breakdown? In that some of these solutions you have are not getting out there. What is the problem? Why don't we have this information out there?
I think because the pesticide industry is profit driven, everything that is communicated aims at making profits for them. So the farmers are normally left at their mercy. It's either your farmer friend or your farmer neighbor gives you the information, or you don't get it at all. Because you find that, and this is something we experienced with the farmer, Greenpeace Africa experienced with the farmers. Most of them were telling us that the agricultural extension officer, whenever they would visit their farms, some of them would actually suggest pesticides for use. They would not tell them about the alternatives, the environmentally friendly alternatives that they can actually use on their farms. So when you come in as an organization and start telling them this, then they ask you, but we have agricultural extension officers that visit our farms. Why aren't they telling us that? So that's where there's a communication breakdown. You find that these ones are telling the farmers what exactly they would like, because for purposes of either making profit or for any other purposes that there may be. And that's where there's the breakdown.
Okay. So how does the use of these pesticides undermine our rights as Kenyans to safe and healthy foods?
Some of these pesticides, like I've mentioned initially, some of them are carcinogenic. They cause cancer. Some of them are mutagenic. They have the capability of altering the genetic composition. Some of them alter our hormonal systems. They affect our nerves, some of them even go to an extent of affecting our reproduction systems. And they not only affect us in that manner, but some of them persist in the environment. They stay for long in the environment. When they stay for long in the environment, you'd find that based on their chemical capabilities or their chemical properties, some of these chemicals, when they react with water, they either dissolve or they do not dissolve. So if they dissolve, they leach into the underground aquifers. You find some of them ending up in a river, some of them where you find most of them in the soil. So when you go to test your soil, you find that it has pesticides probably that were you used several years back and you no longer use them. So how does these pesticides in the soil and water affect us? Some of these pesticides, they affect fish. They're toxic to fish. So when you eat fish from a lake that has a lot of pesticides, you're consuming those pesticides. So that puts you at risk as a consumer. The soil, when you grow food in a soil that has a lot of pesticides, the vegetables or the crops, they absorb the pesticides from the soil. So what you're consuming on your table is food that has a lot of pesticides. And it also alters the water quality. So you find that the water probably in Lake Victoria, if it was clear, it's no longer that way because of these pesticides. Yeah.
Okay. Even when it comes to use of pesticides, we know pesticides are, I don't know whether these pesticides are also selective or they kill all the pests that are out in the farm. Because we also understand there are beneficial pests out there. Are there some that are selective, or they're just they kill everything at one go?
So you find that some of these pesticides, they actually kill most of the beneficial organisms on the farm. So we have the small, like the ladybirds, some of those are beneficial. But now when you have a pesticide that is supposed to control certain pests, but it's also killing bees, then that becomes detrimental, because bees are critical in food production. So that becomes completely detrimental. And that has been the case with most of the pesticides. They're actually applied to control certain pests or fungi or other plant infestations, but they end up killing the non-target organisms. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when it comes to putting our house in order, do we have enough legislations out there that can help us do this? Or we need now to lobby our parliamentarians and our representatives to push for legislation?
I think we do have the legislation. We just need to implement it. We need to enforce it. Because what happens at the moment, there's been a laxity in how we implement the policies that we have. And some of these policies that we have also are geared towards increasing the use of some of these chemicals. When you look at, for example, the agricultural sector and transformation strategy, what it was looking at, increasing the number of farmers who have access to inputs. And when you look at these inputs, what are they? They're chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides. So that essentially means that we're increasing the use of pesticides, some of which are harmful to our farmers. So what does that then mean for us as Kenyans when it comes to food safety? That we are likely not to achieve food safety in the next coming years. We might have food, but it's not safe for consumption. And that means that our right on accessing safe food is undermined. Our right to a healthy environment is already undermined. So we need to make sure that we have policies, and our legislators need to make sure that the legislation that they are putting in place protects Kenyan consumers, because they are Kenyan consumers as well. The same food we eat, they also eat it. It doesn't matter whether they buy it at zucchini and then us guys buy it at the open air markets. It's the same food that we are consuming. Okay. So if they're making legislations that harm us as Kenyans, they're also going to be harmed. And the one thing that I would like Kenyans to show support for, there's a petition that was presented to the National Assembly on Health, the National Health Assembly Committee by the Root to Food organization. And also Greenpeace Africa is collecting signatures to actually support that petition that was tabled in Parliament by Honorable Gladys Boss-Shole on behalf of Root to Food and other organizations. We need Kenyans to come out and support that, because this is just not about these organizations, but we are advocating for what is wrong in our house, what is wrong in Kenya. Like, our food cannot be contaminated, and at the same time our environment is contaminated. We're seeing cases of fish being poisoned from Lake Nakuru. How long will this go on when we keep on enacting policies that aim at increasing the use of chemical pesticides?
Okay. Do you think these are what we can win? Having in mind that, one, corruption is very high in this country. Two, the companies that are producing these chemicals also have deep pockets, and they'll go to any extent to defend their products and to defend the space they have in the market. Do you think we can be able to win this battle?
I believe we can. I believe in people power. I believe that food is a human right. And if these companies, despite their financial muscles, if these companies are undermining our right, then we as the Kenyan people need to stand up against these companies, because they're making profit at our expenses. So we have families that are dealing with cancer patients, and you know how expensive it is to treat cancer patients in this country. But we're still exposed to the harmful pesticides, some of them that have been proven to be carcinogenic. Yet these companies are making money from selling these pesticides to us. So I believe that we have the power to actually say no to these pesticides. If farmers decided, today I'm going to train my neighbor here on organic farming, and there's a ripple effect on farmers training each other on organic farming, then we will have access to organic food. So even if these companies brought their products that are full of chemicals or harmful chemicals, then farmers on the ground already know this is toxic to me, and it's toxic to my family, and it's toxic to the people that I'll sell my produce to. So let me choose this way. I believe we have the capacity to win this. And the other thing that also gives me the hope that we can win this against the multinational corporations that produce these pesticides is that just recently, I think must have been in September, the National Assembly Health Committee actually looked at the petition that was tabled through Honorable Gladys Boss-Shole. They actually looked at it and they were like, the PCPB, Pest Control Products Board, needs to withdraw the chemicals that are harmful. They need to look at those chemicals, and if they're indeed harmful, then they should be withdrawn and banned for use in Kenya. So that already gives me hope that we can actually achieve this.
Okay. And if all that fails, as individuals, is it possible for us as consumers of this food to go to the International Court of Justice and petition the court to take action against some of these organizations?
I don't see why not. We should. We had a case in the USA, a guy by the name Dwayne Johnson sued Monsanto for causing his skin cancer. I think he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We can. if we have cases that show that these chemicals are indeed harmful, and we have scientific evidence that shows that these chemicals are harmful, we can actually do that. I don't see why we shouldn't do it if our rights are being infringed upon, and if our health is being infringed upon, our environment is being contaminated, then we should.
Okay. You had given a solution as that organic farming can be the solution that we are looking for. But most of the time when you talk to people out there, the big question they ask you is, can organic really feed the country?
Yes, it can. Organic farming can feed the country. Organic farming, I say, can feed the country because you don't use a lot of inputs. Recently, we saw farmers were complaining about selling their maize to PCPB because they were saying that they have used a lot of inputs. So that price is way too low compared to the amount of inputs they used. So when it comes to organic farming, you will not have farmers experience such kind of problems, because whatever you're producing it in line with nature. You're using minimal resources to produce more. So let's say, for example, when it comes to this kind of farming, ecological or organic farming. So when it comes to this kind of farming, you're telling a farmer, if you have an acre of land, you need to diversify what you grow. Don't just grow maize alone. When drought comes or the maize is hit by pests and diseases, you don't have anything to eat for yourself and your family. But when you grow different kinds of crop, you've grown maize, you've grown cowpeas, you've grown like our friends from Ukambani, you've grown mangoes on the same plot of land, you've grown spinach, all those kinds of vegetables. So when one crop fails or when one is hit by pests, you at least know that my family has food. And this only doesn't also guarantee that you have biodiversity or you have, a wide range of foods on your table, but it also goes to show to preserve the soil, like you are enriching the soil rather. So some of these crops that you intercrop with or you crop rotate with, some of them are, they fix nitrogen into the soil. When they fix nitrogen into the soil, nitrogen is a key component in crop growth. So it's adding nutrients to the soil. So you are sort of killing two birds with one stone. You're using one technology to make sure you have diverse food on your table, and your soil is also enriched. And it's just not about crop rotation. We have farmers who are using composting. Whatever you get from your cows, you put it in your garden, or in your farm, you end up getting more with very little inputs.
Okay. And regionally, the organization like the African Union, is there a part that they can play in ensuring that, because if we produce safe food, our neighbors are not producing the same food, we might still, one way or another, it will still find its way here. Do you think regional bodies like the African Union can help in ensuring that, maybe by putting in legislation that ensure that countries in the continent, all of them produce safe food?
I actually think so, and it all lies down in standardizing some of these laws. So for example, the East African community, so the East African community can decide to say that this is the procedure we're going to use when it comes to food production. We have legislation that supports ecological and organic farming, and this legislation applies to these three countries. So if any produce that comes from Uganda or Tanzania to Kenya does not follow this procedure of production, then we will not buy it. I think it plays an important role, and that way countries will be forced to implement some of this legislation, because you find that there's something that cannot grow in Uganda but grows in Kenya. So Ugandans import that, or Kenyans import something from Uganda. So if this legislation is put in place, then we as a country are able to adhere to it.
We've talked about the EU and the stringent measures they put to anything they import. What I find I keep struggling with, we can produce vegetables, flowers, that meet the European Union laid down procedures and residue levels. But when it comes back to us, we still don't care about how we produce our food. What does that say about us as a people?
I think it's just about being, it's about laxity. We don't care about what we eat, but we care about what other countries eat. And it's all about the awareness. We don't know what is in our food. The reason the EU is stringent because they know what is in their food. For us guys, we don't know what is in our food. So we're just consuming food, that food that has been, the EU has refused to accept because it surpassed the maximum residue limits. It comes back to the Kenyan market. We buy it, we eat it, because we don't know what's contained in that food. And the relevant bodies that are supposed to tell us that are not doing that. So when you go to the market to buy food, you're probably buying mishiri, the French beans, that the European Union has refused to accept. It has come back to the Kenyan market, and it's full of pesticide residues. Okay. So it's about the awareness that is lacking, also the data, the monitoring data that is missing. We need to have that in place so that consumers in Kenya are consistently aware of what is in their food. We don't want to have this as a one-off thing. We do a monitoring of the food in on the open air markets this month, and then we take again another year or the next month. We want this to be something continuous, that consumers are consistently informed about the food they're eating.
Okay. We all know that agriculture is a devolved function to the counties. I don't know whether you guys work with